pursuant to Public Contracts Code 22050, which authorizes the City Council to not undertake the competitive bid process when such action is necessary in order to respond to an emergency situation. And 6, pursuant to Public Contracts Code 22050, B3, the city manager is directed to report back to the City Council at its next regular meeting, setting forth the reasons justifying why the emergency will not permit a delay resulting from the competitive solicitation for bids for the well, and why the action is necessary to respond to the emergency.
Thank you very much. That was very well done.
Thank you.
Is that in your job description, Ms. Burke? Reading aloud.
Is there further staff report?
Yes, other duties as assigned.
Is there further comment from staff at this point in time?
Well, that's just that's the portion of, I'm Tim Erickson, the Director of Public Works. That's the portion that is the emergency. Now, we're also bringing forward the specifications for the job, and that was the original council item, and we added the emergency item onto that.
What's the difference between construction of a well and construction of a test well?
Well, you would construct the test well first, and then depending upon the results, the test results of that well, you would determine whether or not to go forward with developing it into a production well.
So does the emergency item have anything to do with whether or not we're going to do a test well?
Yes, it does, because that's the first step in moving forward with this.
So we're not going to follow through on item 10A if the test well, which for $150,000 doesn't pan out.
Yes.
I thought there was a well already on the property, and we thought it already showed sufficient water.
There is, but there's no way to know for sure until you drill down what you're going to find below the ground.
Councilmember Crane, I think, was first. Chivalry.
Oh, dear.
I suspect Councilmember Crane has more information about this, but I don't quite understand what the need is to do a test well versus a boring to determine geologically where the best place is for a well so that we don't waste any more money on a dry well. Even a test well could come up dry, isn't that correct?
Absolutely, and that's why you wouldn't want to commit to saying that you have an intent to drill and develop a production well, because first you need to know what's down there. But we're in this situation where we have a water emergency, and we're being advised by the State Water Resources Control Board that no matter what your water right is for surface water, they're advising you, if you can secure a groundwater source, it would be prudent to do that in light of this emergency.
Well, I understand that, but it still doesn't respond to whether we're going to find that it's the right place. I mean, the whole idea of locating a well, I don't really have a lot of expertise about, but it does seem a little mystifying to me to know exactly what's under the surface just based on thinking it might be the right place.
Well, it's more than that. We've done a well siting study, and as part of that well siting study, the area, the aquifer was characterized, and that was done based upon all the available data from the well logs that are on file with the state of California. So what that study initially did was it took all of those well logs, and it took all the information from them about the different types of formation that were found at different depths. And then you run a profile longitudinally and horizontally across the valley, and what you're looking for are those types of soils that would be most likely to have water. So you're looking for water-bearing type soils. In this case, we're looking for gravels, because this is an alluvial valley that has river gravels, and that's where the water is. So when you find those types of formations, you know that you're more likely to find water there. Say that if you were to drill higher up in the valley, where you start to get into the non-water bearing type soils, like on the hillside. So you want to drill where you're most likely to find it. So we've done sort of the we've done the homework, we've done the foundation to know which areas within the valley you're more likely to find water than to not find it. And the thing that's really good about this site is we have two additional pieces of information that I think are working in our favor. One, it's 1,000 feet away from our best well. So it's sort of within that same part of the aquifer that we find well number 4. So that sort of gives us another piece of information that supports this site. And the other piece of information we have is that there were 2 agricultural wells there. So we know that at least at the depth that those wells were drilled, that there is water there. And as I said, this is also the part of the valley that was identified in the well siting study as being where you would want to drill. But I can't tell you that there's a 100% guarantee that if you drill there, you're going to find water. That's just not the nature of this type of business. But what you do is you collect all the data that you have available to you, and and we've hired hydrogeologists to make this determination. And then you look at the qualifications that you're also looking at for that well site, and you take into consideration everything else that you believe is important to you. And I think in this case, one of the really most important factors comes from this letter from the State Water Resources Control Board. They're advising water agencies that if you can develop a groundwater source, to do that. And the further away we are from the river, the less a well is going to be influenced by the river, and the more likely we could make a case and support it that this is a groundwater well. This is not a surface water well. It is not going to be subject to these limitations that the Water Board has already said may be in place this summer. If you've got surface water, we don't care how senior your rights are. We've got a severe water shortage, and you may not be able to exercise those rights. If you have a groundwater well, they're not subject to those limitations.
Thank you. The question is, I think, was that we did the boring out on the Brush Street Triangle, and it came up positive, and we haven't done a boring here. So I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to see if Doug Crane can follow up on this. So the question is the $150,000 commitment. Go ahead, Councilman.
All right, a couple of pieces. One, we did 2 test holes, both in areas that were identified in the study as being probable places there would be water. One of the 2 was a dry hole, as I understand it, which sort of points to what you said, we don't know until we look. Secondly, if we know more about the geology, this is an argument or a thought set that I have been applying consistently since this topic came up. I think it's really important. I hope there are other members of the council who will support this concept. I think it's prudent that we poke some holes in the ground, whether it be cone penetrometer, whether it be borings, before we spend the money for the test well. If we find the right things, we may be able to jump directly to the well. As you say, at the Gobi Street site, there are 2 producing wells. We know of some ag wells on the opposite side of the freeway, closer to the river, probably more river influence. As a general statement, the closer to the river, the more river influence, but that's not an absolute. For instance, the well, the good well, the Granddaddy well at Masonite that Millview has sought so desperately to gain water from, that DDR has used as a tool in their negotiations to make that project work. Very near that well, Millview said, great, we're going to do one. They skipped